everyone can get seated, one thing I can tell you about Palladian View, we start on time, doggone it. So we are in and out in the time that we permit and say we are, and there's some folks I need to make a shout out to. But on behalf of Palladian View, I am thanking each and every one of you for being here today. This is the sixth of a large number to be determined of candidates, and I know that so many of you have come to me and said, I have a personal story with Governor Huckabee. And this man has such a tremendous following, not just with the media. You can see we have CNN here right now. We have some folks from Charlotte Post, all of our local broadcast. So he has a tremendous call, and it's being live streamed, and people are watching this from lots of places. I was told from our IT guy, Michael Urich, who's one of the partners at the Palladian Group, that one of the largest Twitter following and just a tremendous bulging of our Twitter today. So I want to welcome you all on behalf of Palladian View. I want to call out Jan Baxley, who's keeping time and kind of organizing it. And I'm going to ask this, all of the folks from Palladian View that have helped to put this on, would you all stand? Lots of hard work there, ladies and gentlemen. The founder of Palladian View, Betty Poe, is there in this beautiful blue, who's shoving me off. But Betty, thank you for everything that you've done to kind of make this so prolific. I have some elected officials that I'd like to shout out to, but I want to start with Bill Conley, who is chairman of the Republican Party here in Spartanburg County, who we dovetail with and try to elevate, and we have such a great relationship. Bill Conley, that's the reception that we had here. Tremendous chairman. We have our former chairman, Rick Beltram. Where's Rick? I saw him earlier. Rick, thanks for being here. And then from an elected official standpoint, obviously we have Representative Rita Allison, the highest ranking Republican woman in the state's history. But other than that, we have Hope Blackley, who is a tremendous friend and who also has a personal story with Governor Huckabee. So Hope, thank you for being here. So many of you said that you had not been here. I think Mr. Sovey and a couple of others said you had not been here to see the beautiful reconstruct of the Spartanburg Community College, but this is a phenomenal place, and we're so grateful to them. The president, Henry Giles of the Community College, couldn't be here, but he asked me to send his best to each of you. And Governor Huckabee, I want to just take a moment of personal privilege. Palladian View is in its 5th year. And when we were just starting, we reached out to women. We started initially as an opportunity to empower women, and we learned that it was not just women that were disenfranchised, that it was America at large, 80+%. And we held a forum in Charleston, and your beautiful daughter, Sarah, came, and she was one of the stars. And ladies and gentlemen, Sarah has just had Governor Huckabee's 5th grandchild. 3 days old, and so we have a small gift for Sarah that we're giving to Governor Huckabee to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great.
So the purpose, and I say this each time, is to introduce to each of you candidates, and it's interesting because these, and Governor Huckabee, you might find this interesting, the same people don't show up to these. So the group of people here, I'm telling you, they are polled because of you. And what we're really trying to do is give people access to folks that they can hopefully get passionately behind and support and build. And so this is a different profile, so to speak, as others. And Hogan, Gedley, wherever you are, this is an opportunity really to hook on to some of these wonderful folks and to bring them aboard as the election unwinds. So the format's really simple. We have these incredible panelists, 5. We're going to introduce them. We're going to introduce Governor Huckabee. He's going to make some brief remarks, and then we're just going to do a round table. We tried something the last go, and it was fascinating. Michael, if I mess this up, you can stand up and correct me, but I think we had almost 100,000 Twitter followers in some form or fashion, and questions, all of which were posed to ask the name of the candidate PV. So hashtag ask of the name of the candidate PV, Palladian View. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 They're all randomly drawn in here. As they come in, Madison is going to be transposing them and dumping them in here. I'm just going to pull them at random. So the faster we go up here, I'm going to pull them at random and not look at them and just pull them out and answer any questions that the world at large, because we are live streaming this, might do. So I'm going to begin with after Governor Huckabee question and answer, and then Governor Huckabee has a very full schedule. Many of you asked if you could spend some time with him, and that was the purpose of the reception. So hopefully everyone had an opportunity to meet with him beforehand. So let me begin with my friend Beth Brotherton. Beth is a reporter with WYFF News 4. She anchors for Today at 4:30 weekdays. She grew up in Zambia as a child of missionaries, and I always find that so fascinating. She studied broadcast journalism at the University of Illinois, and we're delighted to have her. Ben Hill is here with his wife, Holly, who I met for the first time. Beautiful lady. Ben, as you know, is the morning anchor on Fox News, served internships with NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams. His wife is obviously a Republican. She worked in the White House with Mrs. Bush, and I'm delighted to meet her. And Ben studied journalism and political science at Western Kentucky University, and we've had some going backs and forths because of that. Jason Spencer, this is your first time, and we're delighted to have you. He's a new assistant city editor at the Herald Journal, been there for almost a decade, took a small hiatus and managed online news from Virginia for Patch.com, and is back today and is responsible for managing the daytime operations of the Herald Journal's news reporters. He actually replaced Luke Cannell, who is doing all the press for this. Luke's in the back right now, and he's really going to shoot me. So, Luke, thanks for kind of helping out with that. And then Rita Allison, who's the executive director of Palladian View. None of this would happen without Miss Rita. And as I said before, she is truly, I believe, the most prolific legislator that we have, in that she has ascended to places that had never been before. She is the highest-ranking Republican woman in the history of the state, chairing a committee, Education and Public Works, and really is so dignified and gracious, and a privilege to work with her every day. And last and certainly not least is my friend Tom Crabtree. I did not realize that he had lived in Spartanburg since 1981 when you joined the radio. And he did. Bill Drake was a great friend of mine, and just your longevity and tenacity and accuracy of reporting really is something to be commended. He co-anchors 5, 6, 7, 11 weeknights newscast, and he has a wonderful wife that we're all fond of as well. So thank you, Tom, for joining us today, and I mean that sincerely. So ground rules are real simple. They're going to keep 3 minutes. We're going to try to stay within that. When we get to the end, I'm going to pull out of the bin any question as it arises. The great thing about social media is all these questions have actually they're online somewhere, so they really are randomly selected, and we're going to be moving as quickly as we can to get as many questions answered. I have finally the privilege of introducing to each of you the speaker for today, Governor Mike Huckabee, who was the 44th governor of Arkansas from 1996 until 2007. And if you all study politics at all, that just in and of itself is remarkable. To sustain that, to have been elected serving governor in the largest Republican-serving governor in the state of Arkansas. He really left a legacy of tax cuts, job creation, reconstruction of his state's road system. You know, education is really one of his bailiwicks that he's touted for. He's been named by the governing magazine, it's Public Official of the Year. Time magazine has honored him as one of the 5 best governors in America. His honors really go on and on. He'd been the lieutenant governor for 3 years. The gentleman that was in the governor's position was forced to resign with a felony conviction, and Governor Huckabee stepped up, was one of the youngest governors in the state's history. He is an avid musician, just an avid musician, and I will tell you, tonight in a non-political format, he is going to be with a young man who is building orphanages in Uganda. And there should be a little handout for those of you that don't have it. And I think that they're going to be playing some music together. So it's going to be a great opportunity in Spartanburg, South Carolina. The former governor and his wife, Janet, have 3 grown children, John, David, Lauren, and Sarah. Sarah's the one that's been so helpful to us, and 5 grandchildren, with the latest one, who is 5 days old, George Huggins Sanders. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a great big Spartanburg welcome to Governor Mike Huckabee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go back and tell everyone I got a standing ovation. I think the smart thing is just to stop now and walk out and say, I left to a standing ovation. That was great. First of all, I want to say thanks to Karen and for all the effort that she and her group have put together here for this forum. Deeply grateful for you giving up a big chunk of a Friday afternoon. And thank you very much. We should be finished here by 6, 7 o'clock tonight, so should be fine. Also, my thanks to the panelists, and this is what I call the kiss-up part of the program, where I try to make nice with them so they give me some softballs. I'm sure that isn't going to happen, but we're going to have a great exchange this afternoon. I just will take a couple of minutes before we get into the questions, because I know that's what you really want to be part of, and frankly, so do I. I'm running for president. Many of you know that. I walked into the Beacon a little earlier, and I went up to the guys and I said, hello, I'm Mike Huckabee, I'm running for president. One of them said to his friend, yeah, we were just laughing about that a minute ago. That wasn't supposed to be funny. But I'll tell you what isn't funny. What isn't funny is what's happening in our country right now. We're in trouble. We are in real trouble. And when people say, why are you doing this? You did it before, so why would you do this again? If I didn't think I could win, I wouldn't do it. And if I didn't think that I wouldn't be able to serve effectively and bring a sense of seasoned capacity to govern, I wouldn't do this. Frankly, I've enjoyed what I've done over the past 6.5 years. It's been great. Because you see, in the last quarter century, I've been a candidate for office. That's hard work. It's really hard work, as some of you can attest. I've held office. I was a lieutenant governor for 3 years. Then I was a governor for 10.5 years. I've been a candidate off and on in that length of time as well. And I want to tell you something. Serving as a governor is really hard work. Probably the hardest job I ever had in my life. The most fulfilling, but certainly the most difficult. For the past 6.5 years, I've hosted a talk show on Fox News, and I've done a radio show for the last 6.5 years on 600 radio stations and given commentary. I'm going to be honest with you. Easiest job I ever had was to talk about being a candidate or an office holder. The hardest job was to be the candidate or the office holder. And for the record, talking about it paid better than any of the other jobs I've ever had in my life. So why would I do this again? And I tell people I now, as of this week, have 5 really good reasons. A quarter of a century ago, I had 3 reasons, my kids. Now it is even more urgent to me because I have 5 better reasons, my grandkids. And if we don't do something dramatically different in this country, and do it soon, my 5 grandkids will not grow up in the kind of America where their opportunities and hopes and dreams will be as good as mine. And that, my friend, is unacceptable, because my parents, the greatest generation, gave us the greatest opportunities in the history of mankind. And we're blessed, because most of us grew up in a very different way than we're living now because of those who came before us. We would be doing a great disservice to all those who have shed their blood for this country if we do not reverse the current course we're on and change this notion, because for the first time in American history, people believe that the next generation will not live as well as the current one, and that has never happened before in the history of America. We can't let it happen again. One of the reasons I'm running is because I feel probably that the Democrats will nominate Hillary Clinton to be their nominee. Maybe not nominate, coronate may be the word. And there's only one Republican in America who's running for president who has a history of challenging the Clinton political machine, and you're looking at him. See, most people don't understand. Every race I ever ran in Arkansas, I didn't just run against an opponent, but the long-standing, well-established Clinton machinery that they had put in place is what I ran against every single time I was on the ballot. And Bill and Hillary came back and campaigned personally for every opponent I ever had. It's pretty intimidating when the President and the First Lady of the United States comes back and campaigns for your opponent when you're just running for Lieutenant Governor. It's like, really? Is it that important to you? Yes, it was. And so when I won that office, which they didn't expect and no one really did, I got to the Capitol and my door was nailed shut from the inside, physically nailed shut. And people think I'm making this up, so the Wall Street Journal sent a reporter down to verify that there were physical nails in the door. It stayed nailed shut for 59 days until it finally got open. You may think that Arkansas, like the other southern states and like South Carolina, has been reliably Republican for the past 30, 40 years. It has not. When I was lieutenant governor, I was the only elected Republican in the Capitol. The entire congressional delegation, except for one congressman, they were all Democrats. No Republican had been elected in 25 years, only 3 before me in the history of the state since Reconstruction. And it was tough sailing. But let me tell you what happened in those years. I learned how to govern. And I became governor 3 years later and served 10 and a half years, reelected twice. 49% of the African-American vote in my state. If you can find any Republican in America, white or black, as a candidate, who ever received 49% of the African-American vote in his or her state, please come and tell me, because I'm not aware of any, and neither is the RNC. How do you do that? You do it by learning to govern vertically, not horizontally. You govern not left, right, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican. That's the way most of us in the political arena play the game. We play it horizontally. But the people who really care and the ones who will decide an election, they're interested in vertical politics. Will we go up or will we go down? Will we get better? Will we get worse? So this afternoon, I will enjoy the conversation with you, and I hope to talk about how can we get this country functional again so that we do more than just say, oh, Republicans win, Democrats lose, but we can say America wins and the terrorists lose and our enemies lose. Thank you very much.
So I've been mouthing hot. Can we see if we can get some air conditioning going in here? This is a wonderful facility, but I see a lot of warm people in here. So can someone back there help us out? Great, thank you. All right, Beth, we're going to begin with you, sweet friend.
Thank you. We all wondered what you were doing when you were mouthing hot. It was so awkward as the governor was speaking.
This is Governor
We're like blushing over
who
here.
is hot.
Just tell me it wasn't the hot air coming from the platform. That's all I ask.
Governor, great to have you here. I want to play off something that you said when you opened here. You've done this before.
Yeah.
What's different this time? Is it the game plan? Is it the political climate? Did you learn from some mistakes that you don't want to repeat? It's a crowded field. How are you going to stand out?
It is a very crowded field, and it's a good field. Let me be very candid and say to all of you, there's some terrific people running for president on the Republican side. None of them as qualified as me, of course, but there's some really good people. Quite frankly, a lot of the candidates who are running are friends of mine. Many of them I've known a long time. Jeb Bush and I served contemporaneously as governors. Marco Rubio was my Florida chairman in 2008. Personally, I think that's the role he should be playing this time, but I couldn't convince him of that. I know most of the people running, some not as well as others, but we have some high-quality candidates. It's a frustration to a lot of Republicans that we have so many people running when the Democrats really don't. And some Republicans are afraid it's going to be a train wreck. I hope not. I do have a solution, and the solution is simple. I need to get all those other guys to withdraw and endorse me. Barring that, then I just have to do what I think this primary ought to be about. And I look at it, it's like trying out to be the quarterback of the team. And I want to get the job not because I broke the legs of the other people, but because I played a better game when it got really down to it. If we as Republicans spend this primary season eating each other alive, May God help us and help this country, because we will have blown a great opportunity. So I've learned a lot from having done this before, and I've told people the advantage that I have is that I have done this before. The disadvantage is that I have done this before. I think one of the things that I'll have to go against is there is a certain element of what I call the new girl in school syndrome. When I was in junior high, if we had a new girl that came to our school, and maybe it was like this at your school, every boy in the 7th grade immediately wanted to be her friend. Now, a year later, we might not think she looked any better than the girls we already had. But when she first showed up, she was the best-looking girl in the school. And I do think that there is a sense in which right now in the early stages, a lot of the people who are running are the new girl in school. But here's what I would suggest. If you get on an airplane and you're about to fly through thunderstorms and bad weather, and you look up into the cockpit and sitting in the left seat, there's a guy who turns around and says, with lots of gray hair, I've been flying 20,000 hours and I've flown through hundreds of thunderstorms. Don't worry, we're going to be fine. You go, okay. If you look up there and you see some very young person, half your age, and he turns around and says, hot dog, this is my first real flight. It's going to be fun. You tell me how comfortable you are. Folks, this country's flying through thunderstorms, and we need someone in their left seat who's flown through a few before. And if you've been a Republican governor in a Democratic state like Arkansas, and you fought the Clinton machinery as long as I did, you're prepared to be left seat. And I believe that's one of the reasons that I will qualify for the presidency. Thank you, Beth.
Governor, again, welcome here to South Carolina, and thanks for your time this afternoon. There was a recent attention-grabbing headline, to say the least. It was in an opinion piece for USA Today. This was the title, and I'm quoting, "How Mike Huckabee Fails His Christian Duty," end quote. A very strong accusation. The writer's reasoning in this opinion piece is that Christians should treat transgender people with respect and love. What's your response, especially to that title?
I think I treat everybody with respect and love. I don't know that I have ever been accused of not treating individual people with anything but. And I sincerely don't think even the writer of that article, who's a Democrat, but a nice one, and I know her, I don't think she could point to any level where I've been mean or harsh. Now, I've been very outspoken about biblical values, because it's the only value system that I know that I can count on and depend on 100 years from now. Societal trends change. There's an ebb and flow. People have attitudes that are different today than they were in the 50s, 60s, or 70s. Quite frankly, a lot of people who didn't live through the 60s and 70s think that we're living in the most debaucherous of times. They clearly didn't live through the 60s and 70s. We thought then things were really, really crazy. But you know what? There's a sense in which, while there is an ebb and flow of culture, there's one thing that's constant. And it's even more constant than baseball. It's the constancy of biblical truth. Either it's true or it isn't. If you wish to believe it isn't true, that it's a fairy tale, it's a farce, that it's a crutch for weak people, then I'm not your guy. Vote for someone else. Because someone else will be what I call a thermometer type of political figure. I don't want to be that. A thermometer figure is the person who can read the temperature of the culture and tell you what it is. He just has no intention of doing anything other than reflecting the temperature as it is. I believe leadership is about being a thermostat, not a thermometer. And the thermostat can read the temperature, but the purpose of the thermostat is to adjust the temperature, not simply to reflect it. There are plenty of people who will run for public office at all levels who are content to be thermometers and always want to make sure that their positions match the polls. I believe that if you're a leader, your job is to change the polls, to change public opinion, not to beat people over the head, but to use the art of persuasion based on truth, eternal truth, truth that is far beyond an opinion poll or the sweeping changes of culture. And so that's where I shall stand.
Governor, this week, Republican presidential candidate Carly Fiorina called for over-the-counter birth control. I was wondering what your position is on that and how your position meshes with past comments you made about women being able to control their libido.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jason, because I never said that women can't control their libido. Here's what I said. What I said, and it was at the RNC, and it was interesting because two reporters, Casey Hunt of MSNBC and Dana Bash of CNN, both reported that I said that women can't control their libido, which is 180 degrees opposite of what I said, which was, I said that as a Republican, I respect women who can make decisions and they're not helpless victims of their gender. That I believe women are strong and educated and thoughtful, and they're like my wife, my daughter, my daughter-in-law, and God help me if I ever suggested that they were anything other than strong, independent, and capable of making their own decision. I couldn't live in the house with my very strong wife if I thought otherwise. What I said was, I think it's an insult to women when any political entity treats them as if they are victims of their gender. To me, that's demeaning to every woman, because women are not victims. Women are capable, equal, able. They don't need my help. They don't need my assistance. They certainly have my respect. There's a certain chivalry that I learned as a Southern young man, or my mother would have come out of the grave and slapped me to the floor. But this notion that somehow that they can't exist without me being there to prop them up or to give them some artificial assistance, well, that's nonsense. So what I said was that I don't think women are victims, and I don't think that they are somehow held hostage by their own libido. What I said was opposite of how it was portrayed, which, by the way, is one of the challenges of running for president. Many things that one says end up being reported 180 degrees opposite of what was actually said. And in this day of the internet, I'll give you another example. Recently, there was something that came out that every news organization in America, not only the blogs, but the major news organizations, all ran repeating the story that was first reported, I believe, at the Huffington Post. And out of several hundred press hits that came from it, all repeating the same story, all at 100 and plus were untrue. You know how many of those news entities called my office to ask what the real story was? How many of you want to guess? You said zero? You were exactly right. Not one. Not one. You would think that a phone call or an email wouldn't be that difficult, and I've got a whole press staff that can answer those things. Nobody called. They just ran with the story. So as a candidate, it's very frustrating, and I appreciate your bringing that up so I could clear that one up. Heck, we may clear up a bunch of stuff this afternoon. We'll just work on it. Thanks.
Governor, thank you for being here, and more than that, thank you for stepping up to the plate. We need good, strong candidates to come out with a good, strong president before this is over with. We believe here that education is the engine that drives our future in this state. We get a lot of intrusion, though, from Washington, i.e. the U.S. Department of Education and all. If you become president, where do you stand on our education policies coming out of Washington?
Wonderful question, Rita, and here's the simple answer to that. I don't think there is a federal role in education other than to encourage best practices. That's it. There should be no regulation of education at the federal level. Education is ultimately a mother and father decision, and then it becomes the entrusted decision as the citizens create school boards and perhaps in their state a state constitution that will govern the administration of education. But it ultimately is a decision that is made best when it's made closest to the students. So I believe it's an issue that should not involve the federal government. If somebody's running for president, they want to give you a 15-point education plan, I would suggest that you say, excuse me, where in the Constitution do you have the authority to come up with a 15-point federal plan? Why don't you come up with a return of those resources back to the states and let the people in South Carolina make South Carolina decisions. I was a governor for 10.5 years. I was covered up with education, and I worked hard with education reform. And there were a number of things that we did at the state level that I am happy to talk about and champion, that I would love to talk about even only from the bully pulpit of the presidency, but never to impose it, never to say that the federal government should impose what one state did as the template to fit on all of the other 49 states.
Tom.
All right, Governor, welcome back to Spartanburg.
Thank you.
Good to see you. I wish I could gig with you tonight.
Me too.
But there's news to be done this evening. At 7, we have a feature we call Voice of the Voter. We urge people to send in questions. So this next question I'm going to give you is straight from one of our viewers. And obviously she wants to know your stand on the current debate over raising the minimum wage, not just raising it a little, raising it a lot. Her question to you is, would you be willing to serve for minimum wage, pay your own insurance, donate the rest of the money to the homeless, elderly, and veterans?
Well, first of all, if a person made minimum wage and paid their own insurance, there would be nothing left to donate. That's for sure. I think Republicans have been sucked into the debate on the minimum wage without thinking about what we're really talking about. I've said for a long time to people who say, are you for minimum wage? I think we ought to have it. I said, well, wait a minute, let me ask you something. What would you like for it to be? The Democrats are proposing $10 an hour, maybe 12. So, okay, can you make it on $10 an hour if you have a family of 4? And they always say, well, no. I said, then let me see if I understand. You're asking the Democrats to give you a wage that you already admit on the front end is a minimum that's far beneath the capacity for you to live on. So how is that a victory? And they sit there and they say, well, I guess it isn't. So why is it that you are wanting to let a political party take you to the very bottom of the floor and somehow that you're supposed to be satisfied with that? I said, I got a better idea than the minimum wage. I'd like to propose that we get you to the maximum wage. The maximum wage. And when people say, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, it's a little different because rather than the government arbitrarily creating a wage that you still can't live on, why don't we find out what would you like to earn per hour? And if they say, well, I'd kind of like to earn $30 an hour. I said, all right, let's find a list of all the jobs that pay $30 an hour or more. By the way, there are quite a few jobs that pay that or more. A finished carpenter can make somewhere around $48,000 a year if he's really good, minimum of $32,000. A plumber, $54,000 a year, owns his own business, perhaps more. I know some of you are thinking, really? Not maybe every plumber, but a lot of plumbers do. I'll tell you a quick story. A friend of mine is a neurosurgeon. And he called a plumber one day to fix a drippy faucet. The plumber came, looked at it, unscrewed the faucet, put a new washer in, screwed it back on, said, there, that ought to take care of it. And the neurosurgeon said, well, that was easy. That was great. How much I owe you? He said, that'll be $85. The neurosurgeon said, my gosh, man, $85, you weren't here 60 seconds. I'm a neurosurgeon. I don't make that kind of money. The plumber said, I didn't either when I was a neurosurgeon. Now, I'm telling you this because here's what we do. We persuade people to go to college at some very expensive Ivy League school to get a degree in the humanities, nothing against that pay them $32,000 a year, and they have $100,000 in student loans, and we wonder why the economy's screwed up. Hello? Rather than beg people to get to the minimum, ask them, what do you want to make? Let's find the jobs that pay what you want and get you to school, train you to do that job, and you'll make more money than you'll ever make with the government setting the floor. Live for the stars, not the ground. And so I would suggest that we put a focus on how we get people to their maximum earning rather than to help them to learn to be satisfied with what the government would have them to do as the minimum.
Great answer. This is from Blake from Boiling Springs. How do we hold medical companies accountable for providing fair insurance?
Well, let me begin by saying, when you ask how do we hold medical companies, is that what they're saying, medical companies?
That's what the text was.
They mean medical
or
insurance
tweet.
companies?
I guess. I don't know.
I'm going to have to assume
yes.
they're talking about how do you hold insurance companies accountable for fair insurance, have enough in the market that if people aren't treated fairly, they go to a different player. But we have screwed the insurance system up by Obamacare, because what we did, by rather than creating a competitive market where people bought the elements that they wanted, needed, and could afford, we forced them into a government-mandated system where we buy things we don't need, don't want, can't afford. Let me give you an idea. I am a 59-year-old male. I have maternity coverage. I don't think I need it. I'm pretty sure I don't. If I do get pregnant and deliver, I'll have a reality show and it'll make far more money. I won't need the insurance coverage at all. My point is, you're laughing because how silly is that? It's silly enough that we've done it at the federal level and mandated it. That's how silly it is. Here's what we need to be doing in the medical field and the insurance field that is really transformative. Rather than figure out how much money we're going to spend on health care, do you know how much money we spend today on chronic disease? 80% of our health care dollar is spent on chronic disease. We do not have a health care crisis in America. We have a health crisis in America. Here's another one. 85% of your lifetime health care expenses will be spent in your last 18 months of life. If you live to be 80, up until the point of 78 and a half years old, you will have spent 15% of your health care dollars lifetime. In the last year and a half, between 78 and a half and 80, when you die, that's when you'll spend about 85% of your health care dollars. You know why? Because we are sick by the time we get there. We live in a very poor health, and it shows up at the end of life care. It's very expensive. You remember in the 50s when well, some of you don't because you weren't around. Some of you are laughing. You were here. Quit laughing. I know you were there. Well, we remember, those of us who were there, that what happened was we decided we were going to get rid of polio, and we did. And by getting rid of polio, kids who were a year or two older that had braces on their legs, I never had to face that, because I remember lining up at the county courthouse in Hempstead County, Arkansas, and getting the polio vaccine. You know how much money we spent on polio last year in America? Zero. We didn't spend a dime. Over the years, over the past 60 years, we have saved hundreds of billions of dollars that would have been spent treating people with polio. In 1960s, we said we're going to send a man to the moon and bring him back, and we did it. Here's what if we took that same determination, and here's what we said. We're going to take care of finding a cure for cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's within the next decade. Here's what would happen. Diabetes is almost a $500 billion a year disease in America. Heart disease, $313 billion. Cancer, $100 billion a year. Alzheimer's, by the year of 2050, will be a $1.1 trillion disease in America. We can't afford it. How do you fix it? Well, you fix it rather than by saying, how much more money can we spend on the medicine? Why don't we spend the money on curing it rather than just trying to treat it? Any of you who have ever been through a family member with Alzheimer's, I don't have to convince you that a cure would be a much better improvement than a better bed for your loved one to die in. Any of you who have ever had a family member with cancer, my wife had cancer in our first year of marriage. Nobody has to convince me that a cure would be much better than weeks of radiation and all of the horrible transitions that one goes through with cancer. Same with heart disease, diabetes. That's how we need to change the medical care system in the country.
Thank you. Ben.
Governor, we have today what I assume is a mostly conservative audience, but a lot of Americans obviously identify themselves as moderate. As a matter of fact, a lot of them don't even have a political affiliation. One of their chief complaints is a lack now of bipartisanship in Washington. In that vein, could you name a success, even just one or two, that President Obama has had in his time in the White House?
Successes?
Yes.
I think he's been a good father and a good husband, and I really do. I believe he's given good leadership to...
How about a political success or a legislative
success? How much time have I got? Look, I think our foreign policy has never been so screwed up ever. I can't name, and I've asked Democrat friends of mine, and I've got Democrat friends, and I've asked them, and I'm not trying to be facetious or harsh, but I've asked Obama supporters, I said, name one country on the planet with whom we have a better relationship now than we did when he took office, and even his staunchest supporters can't name one. When I look at the domestic scene, last month our economy shrunk. I've said that this summer, Obama's coming out with a new Disney movie that he's starring in. It's called Honey, I Shrunk the Economy. I mean, we're living under the longest return from a recession. I hear we're in recovery, but I talk to people every day, Ben, that aren't in recovery. They're lifting heavy things, sweating through their clothes, and they're going downhill, not uphill, when it comes to their own economic position. And so I'm having a hard time coming up with something that I can say, boy, there's a real example of great leadership. I mean, I'm sure I could come up with something if I thought about it long enough, but I'm looking at the two biggest things, the threat of international terrorism and our local economy in the U.S., and I'm having a hard time coming up with a good answer.
How about this then? If elected as president, would you reach across the aisle and work with Democrats?
You know, not only would I, but look at my record. When I took office as governor, 89 out of 100 of the House members were Democrats. 31 out of 35 senators were Democrats. It was the most lopsided legislature in all of America, more than Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, Oregon, California. I know people are shocked to hear that, but Arkansas was the most Democratic state in the country. I never got less than 90% of my legislative package passed in a state that was overwhelmingly against me politically. So my record of working with people for education reform, for infrastructure reform, for health care reform, is pretty doggone remarkable. It's one of the reasons that I'm running, because I do understand what it's like to run against the headwind, but to do it successfully. And I couldn't have done it, because I tell you, politics is pretty simple. It's really counting to 51. If you can get 50 plus 1, you win. If you're under that, you lose. It's that simple. It's math. It's very simple math. It's not algebra. It's not geometry. It's simple addition, subtraction. And if you can't get the votes, you don't win. You get the votes by governing and working with people. How did I get the kind of African-American vote? Those were all Democrats. How did I get those folks to work with me? Because I worked with them. I learned how to govern. I realized that the Rolling Stones were the greatest political scientists of all time. They really were. Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, great political figures. You don't remember their song, You Can't Always Get What You Want? Look, that's true in marriage, it's true in business, it's true in politics, and we sometimes forget that good governing is not saying, I get everything, you get nothing. It's saying, come, let us reason together. That's how you win.
Governor, you spoke earlier about biblical values. Earlier this year, the Pew Research Center released a study that showed fewer people, percentage of people were identifying themselves as Christian, whereas people who were unaffiliated or had no religious affiliation was on the increase. How do you build a campaign to reach this more secular demographic?
I don't think most people are concerned as much that I have beliefs. I think they just want to know that my beliefs are authentic and that I can defend them. Historically, Americans have been a nation, we never required faith. In fact, that's unconstitutional for us to impose or require a certain religious belief or test in order to hold office or to vote. We've never done that, and we never should. But we certainly don't want to get to the place where we would forbid people to hold office who were strong believers. And that's where we're rapidly heading. That's what concerns me most. The fact that we have more people who are saying, you know, I'm really not affiliated, is not that big a concern to me. I know you would be shocked to hear that, but frankly, I think it's more of an honest assessment. People don't feel a social pressure to say, oh, I belong to a church. When I was a kid growing up, we always said there were two kinds of Christian. The one who would show up in church but didn't really mean it, and the one who really meant it, and that was the one that you were afraid of the most. The old saying was, a fanatic is somebody who loves God more than you do. The fact is, people don't feel that societal pressure anymore. Frankly, I think that's good because people are more honest. And I'm going to shock you again. I'd rather vote for an honest atheist than a dishonest, phony Christian. I really would. I'd rather vote for somebody who says, I don't believe, but here's, I'm authentic. You know what I'm going to stand for. I'd handle that over somebody who pretended at election year to love God and go to church every Sunday and sing loud and pray a lot, but really didn't mean a darn thing. I just want to know that people They don't have to agree with me. I just want them to agree with themselves. And I think a lot of voters feel that way. So I hear people say, aren't your views out of touch with younger people? No, because my views are just that. They're mine. I can defend them. I can articulate them. I'm more than capable of having a thoughtful discussion with anybody about them. And I've been on virtually every Ivy League campus in this nation and have engaged students at Princeton and Yale and Harvard and Brown and Cornell, and found that I'm more than capable of defending what I believe. And I think the students, I found them to be far more respectful, that they knew that I didn't show up and then suddenly pretend that I was Bill Maher's best friend. I think they were happy that I am who I am. So I'm not as concerned that we have different views. I'm concerned that we only let our views become tailored to whatever the audience wants to hear. I think that's a turnoff for people more than anything.
Governor, you mentioned infrastructure a few minutes ago. There's a great deterioration of infrastructure, not only in our state of South Carolina with roads and bridges, but across this nation. And there's so many of our major interstates and all that are deteriorating, and they are federally matched monies for those. Where do you see this country going, and where would you want to take them with the dire need of infrastructure?
It was a Republican who created the interstate system, Eisenhower. One of the best things that ever happened to not only the transportation system of America, but frankly to the economy of America. If you can't move raw material in and you can't move finished product out and do it efficiently and safely, then you're going to have a real injury to the economy. I faced this challenge when in Arkansas I inherited what Truckers Magazine said was the worst road system in the country. By the time I left, they said it was the most improved road system in the country. If you ever see ads attacking me for raising taxes, and you will, in fact, you already have, I'm kind of honored. I was the first presidential candidate to have a super PAC spend against me. They did it the day I announced. You know why? Because they say, he raised taxes. Well, here's what I did. I proposed that instead of going into big long-term debt and letting my children and grandchildren pay for a road system that was destroying our economy, I said, let's build it, let's pay for it, because it's in our best interest. And we did. And we put a 4-cent gasoline and a 3-cent diesel tax, and we put it before the people, and 80% of the people in my state voted for that. Now, personally, I think getting an 80% vote out of anybody to support additional taxes upon themselves, that ain't half bad. You normally can't get 80% of the people to all vote that they like ice cream sundaes. So that's pretty good. So yes, did I raise taxes? I sure did. What did I use it for? To do the thing that the people who elected me asked me to do and fix the road system, which we did. Republicans have made a mistake of believing that their orthodoxy is tied to saying, I never raised taxes. I don't think we need to raise taxes at the federal level to be quick about it. But the biggest mistake we've made is we've let debt roll up because we haven't been honest about some things that cost money. Now, I think that if we looked at it honestly, it's not just roads and bridges, it's airports and it's infrastructure like sewer system and water systems in urban areas that have gone unrenewed for decades, and it's crumbling around us. I want the decisions made at the local level, and local people decide. You want better roads or not? But here's what I can tell you, that if your roads are really sorry, it'll cost you an average of $618 per vehicle per year in additional car repairs. So if you could pay an additional $400 a year to build better roads, would it be a pretty good investment? You'd get double your return. I don't know where most Wall Street people come from, but where I come from, a little town of Hope, if you could double your money back, you'd be doing all right. So if you have a road system that's killing your cars, if you fix it, what do you gain? You gain money. It's a pay raise to poor people, is what it is. If you have an airport system that has planes sitting on the ground rather than flying somewhere, you're losing not just the money and the cost of the environment that's going up in smoke, but think of the social capital. I sit on airplanes all the time, and I hear women call and say, I'm sorry, honey, my flight's delayed. I'm going to have to take a later flight, and I'm not going to make it to your recital. You can never make that up. We're losing a lot of social capital. Can't calculate for you the cost of that. It's just extraordinary. So I believe that one of the things the next president needs to do is to honestly and firmly address the infrastructure issue and to come with a bipartisan solution, not making this a shovel-ready nonsense, but actually putting together a real approach to dealing with it.
Thank you.
Governor, you and I are very close to the same age. My wife has already retired. I think for myself and for many of the folks who are in this audience, probably one of the things on our minds a lot is whether these entitlement programs we have paid into for decades and decades and decades are going to be there when we need them. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, they have not had a substantial reform in a long time. Congress keeps saying, yeah, we ought to do that. It doesn't happen. What would your administration do?
It's a great question, Tom, and I kind of am standing all by myself on the Republican stage on this one because most of the Republicans are saying we're going to have to means test the recipients, we're going to have to raise the age at which people retire, and we're going to have to cut the benefits. Well, let me tell you why I disagree with that. First of all, I don't see Medicare and Social Security as an entitlement in the same way that I do, let's say, Medicaid or food stamps, because you paid in. You paid your money. By the way, last time I checked, you didn't voluntarily pay that money in. If you're 65 years old and you started work when I did at age 14, which is when I started working, that means when I get to 65, and no, I'm not there yet, but when I get to be 65, I will have been working for 51 years, and every paycheck I ever had, the government took something out of it before I ever got to see the money. They didn't ask me about it. They didn't give me the option. They took it away from me, and they said, don't worry, we're going to take care of it for you. And when you get to be 65, here are the benefits. And they send me every year a little statement that tells me what I can expect. Now, I never have believed that I could live on that. But the point is, I didn't make the deal, they did. And for them to come right now as I'm getting close to that point of saying, okay, 51 years you've been hauling money out of my check. Where is it? You know what, we messed up. Well, that's just one more way that the government has lied to me and stolen from me. And if we really want to make people in this country ready to take down every one of the marble buildings in Washington, let's go tell them. Let's be the Republican Party that goes and says, we'd like to lie and steal from you a little more. Not me. And I'm telling people this is not the right approach. Part of the reason we're in trouble is because the way we fund Social Security and Medicare is that it's all based on the payroll tax. And because of the way that our economy has shifted, most people today do not get a paycheck. The biggest money is made on investments, which means there is nothing being paid into Social Security and Medicare from investment income. I'm a fair tax supporter, which is a tax on consumption, not on our income. And if we had the fair tax, all the tax money paid at the point of consumption goes into the general fund, which means that rather than a shrinking payroll tax, fewer and fewer people paying in and 10,000 people a day going into the new system of Medicare and Social Security, because that's how many retire a day, now we have a better funding stream. Now, there's still more things that need to be done, but the first thing I think we do is to say, if the government screwed up, let's don't make the penalty the fault and the responsibility of somebody who is old, who's sick, or who's a widow. I'm sorry, but those are the three types of people in this nation that the least we need to do is to keep the promises to them. And I don't know why Republicans want to go out on the limb and say, yep, we're going to take it away from you now that you got close to the finish line. We're going to put our foot out and trip you so you fall face first when you get to be 65. I don't think that's the way to govern. And so count me out as far as wanting to take those benefits, and instead, let's look at a real reform of how we fund it and what we do for it.
So you would push Congress to finally do something about it then?
I would, but I would not do it at the expense of the recipients and tell them, and here's what I've said, and it's not just a point of rhetoric, it's really, for me, principle. If Congress is just hell-bent on taking someone's benefits away, let them start with their pension, their retirement, and their health care.
All right, here we go from Melissa from Moore. Do you trust in states, local governments to have full control of school districts?
Do I trust them?
Yes.
I trust mothers and fathers even more. I think that's where the ultimate education decision should be. But the next level up should be local school boards, and the next level up should be the state. Now, in some states, depending on the way the Constitution is written, the state has responsibility and they delegate to the local, but the local is still subject to the state. Arkansas was like that, and as governor, we had to go in and shut some school systems down. I'll never forget when we got the authority to do it, and people thought we'd never do it. I said, you bet we will, because I'm not going to let some kid go through 12 years of public education at taxpayer expense and then be functionally illiterate, and then for the rest of his life be on government assistance because we never gave him the decent education that the parents thought they were paying for. So we went to some school districts, and we had the authority, and we actually fired the entire school board, fired the superintendent, brought in our own level of governance, and changed the school system. I got very serious about that. If we're going to spend this money of the taxpayers, and we spent 70 cents out of every dollar in education in Arkansas. That included higher ed, but 50 cents of every dollar was K through 12. You're spending half the general revenue budget on education and you're not getting the results. By gosh, it's time to do something about it. So we did. And I believe that should happen at the local level. Give parents the power. If their child is in a failing school and the government assigned school is failing them, give the parents the power to say, I'm not putting my kids in that school because no one in that school ever gets to college, no one in that school ever succeeds. I want my kids to go to a different school. Give parents the power to choose with their feet, and I'm convinced that some schools will start behaving better when they have to. They may not until they do.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about health, and we're not going to bring up the cheeseburger that you had at the Beacon. I promise.
I didn't eat everything on that plate, Beth.
He did not finish the whole burger.
Thank goodness.
I want to ask about that because similar to Governor Christie, your weight, your health has been an issue that's been talked about for so many years. I was always impressed about the stories of your weight loss and your running and your commitment to your health. How did that change you as a person? What did it teach you about yourself and the importance of moderation and commitment and sticking to a task? And do you think that Americans care about what kind of health their president is in?
I think they want to know their president is healthy enough to do the job. I don't think they want to micromanage another person's health. I mean, there are people who are heavy who are healthier than people who are rail skinny. Weight is not solely an indication of health. There are a lot of factors. I've struggled with my weight all my life. I've recently lost weight. Back in 2003, I had a real health scare. My doctor scared the daylights out of me. I lost 100 pounds, reverse diabetes. I know that can be done. And, for the most part, I took pretty good care of myself. Last couple of years, I began to go back to bad habits, realized I got to fix this. And so I did. It's not that complicated, to be honest with you. And as I've told people, healthy living is really more about the mind than it is our menu. And once I decide I'm going to do it, I do it. I think we should encourage good health. I think there should be incentives for the healthier we live. Part of the healthcare system failure is that we don't reward good health habits, and we essentially subsidize poor health habits. And the people who really could use the encouragement don't get it. We found in our state, which is one of the things that I did do as governor, we gave our state employees and Medicaid recipients incentives to quit smoking, take care of their weight and blood sugar by giving them cash bonuses for taking better care of themselves. People say, well, that's just bribery. No, it was a good investment because what we spent on the bonuses were much less than the health care cost for them not taking care of themselves. There are creative ways to do it. But I do think the focus has to be on health rather than health care. The entire paradigm of the healthcare system is all about treating diseases once they're catastrophic rather than preventing them before they get there.
Does there need to be a national program, and would you continue on something like Michelle Obama has done with the Let's Move type organization?
Look, I admire that she recognizes that childhood obesity is a serious issue, and it is. Where I disagree, and I don't disagree with the intent, I disagree that you cannot force children to like carrots, and you cannot absolutely make them and give them a little paltry serving, or to assume that every 12-year-old is the same. There are some 12-year-olds who weigh 80 pounds and some who weigh 180. You cannot give them the same plate of food and say they're the same. They're not. The kid who's very athletic and big and bulky probably needs more calories than the kid who is an 80-pound kid. And so I think that, again, let these decisions be made at the local level. Can the president and or the first lady and others encourage healthy behavior? Sure. Can you help to incentivize? Maybe. But I still believe those decisions are best left to the local level, for the same reason that I'd like to see almost all regulation moved out of Washington and down to the states, for this reason. If something works, the other states will copy it. If it doesn't, you haven't made a 50-state mistake. And the mistake we make is to assume that everybody in all the states have the same demographics, and that's not true. So you make your decisions in South Carolina. Frankly, I'd like for your banking regulations, environmental regulations, a lot of the business regulations, you make it here. You know what you need, and we don't need to make it for you in Washington.
Ben, we're just about out of time, so I'm going to let you ask a question. And Jason, I'm going to have to cut it off, and I know that breaks your heart, but next time we'll let you go first. How's that, Ben?
I'll try to ask quickly, too, because I know we're running short on time. Governor, recently an American man was killed in Syria. He was not a member of the U.S. military. He did this on his own volition, fighting ISIS. President Obama, since then, has pledged more troops into Iraq. However, it appears those 450 troops will serve more of a role of a training purpose rather than combat troops. Firstly, what do you make of this plan? Because a lot of Americans still are war-weary, despite being fearful of ISIS, and they frankly don't want to spend the money. But I think there is an agreement that there's a lot of fear out there amongst ISIS. So how do we stop them without too much bloodshed and spending too much money?
You never defeat an enemy on the cheap. One of the mistakes that this administration has made is decimating the military through a combination of cutbacks and sequestration. And the result is that we have the lowest military preparedness since before World War II. That scares the pants off of me, and it ought to off you. What we have failed to recognize is that the best way to avoid a war is to have a military that nobody wants to fight, because nobody knows, or everybody knows, they can't defeat it. When you were a kid in school and there was a bully in the playground, who'd the bully pick on? The kid he could beat. The bully never picked on the kid who would put him on his butt. If we want to have the kind of world that's safe, we have a military that anybody even looks at us the wrong way, and we put them on their backside, and everybody in the rest of the world says, that really wasn't a very smart idea. You don't do that by decreasing your military. You do it by having a military that's much more in line with what we had in the 80s, when we were spending 4 to 6% of GDP on the military, not the current 2% of GDP on the military. It's a foolish thing, and I know some people say we can't afford it. Folks, we can't afford to have a perennial conflict with ISIS and other radical Islamic groups who want to cut our heads off. And what we need to be doing, instead of flying a few hundred sorties a month, which is what we're doing against ISIS, we ought to be doing what we did in the Gulf War, which was flying 10,000 of those missions a day. And we have the intelligence capabilities. When you see a truck that's bringing supplies to the ISIS soldiers, you take an A-10 and you blow it into smithereens. You simply don't let those trucks ever get to their destination. You don't send a few planes over and look at them and say, gee, maybe we should think about doing something. You build a coalition of the nation states in the Middle East. Interestingly, our policies have pushed the Egyptians, Jordanians, Kuwaitis, Saudis, and the Emirates into the arms of the Israelis. They're now all in an alliance that is stronger than the alliance with the U.S. because they know something that this president doesn't know. You don't trust a terrorist state like Iran with a nuclear weapon, and you don't spend 9 months saying we don't have a plan for ISIS, which is what this administration has done. So no, nobody wants a war, but what we want less is a permanent type of intrusion into our safety and security. And I think it's time we say, we're not going to limit what we do. We're going to build up whatever we need. We're going to go all out. Look, President Bush 41 had it right. Don't fight a war unless you mean it. And if you mean it, establish what your strategic objective is, get an overwhelming, overpowering force that is so incredibly strong that you know it's going to succeed. You go in, you achieve your objective, and you get the heck out, and you don't spend the taxpayers' money nation building. The military is not a UN organization. I know our time's up. One final statement. The purpose of our military, and this sounds harsh, but let me be blunt. You don't put people in uniform and train them with weapons so that they can hammer and nail schools together. No offense, that's what the Peace Corps does. The military kills people and breaks things. And if you want a military, you train them to be a formidable force to attack evil. And what we have in this nation, this world today, we are fighting evil. We treat it as evil, and we're not going to handhold it. We're going to take it out. We're going to arm our partners like the Kurds. We're going to work with our allies, but we're not going to do their work for them. We expect them to do some of their own heavy lifting as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was remiss. We have a former party chairman, Dr. Graham, who led this party when we had enough Republicans to fit literally in a telephone booth. Dr. Graham, if you can stand up, we appreciate your service for all of us. And last and certainly not least, Alexa Newman, who facilitated all of the wonderful reception that the Republican Party put together. Ladies and gentlemen, let us thank in a Spartanburg way the tremendous efforts for Governor Mike Huckabee.